So, viewers, welcome to ETV Bharat. Today, we are joined by a former ambassador to Afghanistan, Gautam Mukhopadhyay. Many thanks for joining us, sir,
Most
today
welcome.
here. Of course, to begin with, we have seen that a lot of developments happening in Afghanistan. Of course, after the exit of the US troops and the Taliban taking over after 20 years, how do you see this? What is the way forward for Afghanistan? Your point of view.
Well, the beginning is not really very good. I happened to reopen the Indian Embassy in Kabul in November 2001, 1 week after the fall of Kabul to the Northern Alliance at that time, supported by US CI operatives. At that time, Kabul was peaceful. It was during the Ramzan period, but Kabul was peaceful. In fact, people were very happy that the Taliban had been ousted, and that a new government was going to form, which was going to be a freer government. If I see the situation today, the messy US withdrawal and also the violent US withdrawal, because we saw two really major large-scale attacks at the airport, one a suicide bomb and complex attack, and a second one rocket attacks, which led to the deaths of more than 100 people, 170 Afghans and 13 US soldiers. So the augury is not good. What we seem to be coming in for is a state of even more severe violence than we have seen so far, as various extremist, radical, and in some cases terrorist outfits, which have been part of the Taliban conglomerate, if you can call it, supported by the Pakistani ISI, who, as they all find Afghanistan as a kind of theater of their victory, and they get emboldened for further attacks. But the good case scenario would be that if the Taliban are serious about what they say and actually are ready to form an inclusive transitional government, accommodating the various political and ethnic communities that actually constitute the majority of Afghanistan, and give them real power, not just positions without power, then we can perhaps look forward to a kind of peace process, albeit it has after the military takeover. Though, to be very frank, I am not optimistic of that. I would not say that the worst case scenario will happen. What you can have in between is a kind of civil war or a resistance on the part of those who support the Islamic Republic. At this point of time, as you know, it is confined, or it is beginning from Panjshir Valley. So, you have 3 or 4 scenarios available, and none of them are looking very good. In other words, the Taliban, I doubt if the Taliban will be able to provide peace and stability, which is the thing that Afghans most want.
Right. Now that we have seen that the entire focus has been shifted to the Panjshir resistance, of course, and now Taliban is somehow, of course, there are reports coming in, they had already surrounded, and the Panjshir resistance has claimed that they have killed few Talibans there. So, how long do you think will the Panjshir resistance be able to hold out the Taliban onslaught, which is the world actually is looking up to? What is your point of view on that?
Panjshir is a very protected valley. It's a very difficult valley to breach. And actually, that is why it is not so easy to break the siege. And the Panjshiris are also a very plucky people, and they are led by, I think, 2 of the most plucky leaders in Afghanistan today. One is, of course, current Vice President Amrullah Saleh, and the second is Ahmad Massoud, the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud. And the Panjshir resistance is not just for Panjshir. In fact, it's a resistance for the whole idea of a free Afghanistan, which was represented earlier by the Islamic Republic, which had its flaws. But as you know, the majority of Afghans preferred the Republic with its flaws, not necessarily the Ghani government, but at least the freedoms that came with the Islamic Republic over the Taliban. And you have seen proof of that in the kind of rush, I mean, the kind of desperation with which people are trying to leave Afghanistan. by plane or
Right.
by foot or by, through any border that is available. So I would say that this Panjshir resistance represents far more than just Panjshir. It represents the
Okay.
desire for freedom and civil, political, human rights of the Afghan people. And this is only the beginning. I think we can expect to see it grow. I acknowledge that, militarily they are in a bad situation right now, because in the last resistance in 1996-2001, Ahmad Shah Massoud had been able to preserve, a
Right.
corridor to Tajikistan. But they are still working hard. They have recaptured a few districts in Baglan district, and it is still possible that they may be able to, to establish a kind of corridor or a rear base. I don't think the story is over yet.
So, of course, moving forward, can we expect something positive out of it, or is there a hope still left for Afghanistan? Because
If you ask me
given the scenario
objectively,
altogether,
it is not a very promising situation. But we must always give what the people of Afghanistan most want, which is peace a chance. A lot depends on the Taliban, whether once they have achieved their so-called victory, whether they are willing to be magnanimous and accommodate the other political currents in Afghanistan, who actually are a majority, as I said earlier. But a lot also depends on Pakistan. It has been Pakistan's strategy over the last 20 years, frankly, actually 27 years, since they raised the Taliban from the madrasas on the Pakistani side of the Durand line, to dominate Afghanistan and to virtually control Afghanistan. I find it difficult to believe that, having kind of really succeeded in that, that they will also change their mind. So the source of the problem, I must say, is that it lies in Pakistan. And, while successive US administrations have realized that at different points of time, somehow none of them have followed it up with the necessary coercive diplomacy that was required.
and of course, I would talk about the decision ever since the Biden has taken the decision of withdrawing the troops. Of course, Trump has also. So now finally it happened. But do you think this decision was fair enough when we talk
No,
about
it's a
withdrawing the
sovereign
entire
decision.
forces?
Yes, it's a sovereign decision. I think probably a large majority of the American people were not committed or not interested in a continuation of their deployment of their troops in Afghanistan. It had been 20 years since they had been there, and they hadn't got a result or an adequate result. President Biden, of course, believed that the Al-Qaeda, which was the main reason why they came there, they were defeated with the death of Osama bin Laden, and that they had other priorities, which the President Biden spelled out in his April 16 statement to the country. So I think they have left for their own reasons, and they felt that this was going to be an endless war. But I think the manner of their withdrawal left much to be desired and is directly responsible for the situation today. And I think the chief inflection point in that was the US-Taliban deal negotiated by Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, and signed on February 29, 2020, which firstly was negotiated behind the backs of the Afghan government and Afghan people. Secondly, delegitimized the Afghan government and legitimized the Taliban. Thirdly, separated the US-Taliban component of a peace process from the Afghan component of the peace process, leaving the latter very, very weak. And the end result was a kind of position where both, whether it was diplomatically, politically, or militarily, the decks were stacked heavily against the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and heavily in favor of the Taliban. And it is not possible, and this whole process was in a way enabled by Pakistan. And it is not possible that the United States did not know what they were doing, that as a result of this, the Taliban would take over. But quite clearly, they were either okay with it or they abetted it.
Right. Now I would like to, focus on the geopolitical relations. I would say the geopolitical. Of course, we have seen that the Pakistan Interior Minister has somehow they have clarified that, of course, Pakistan has been a safe haven for for Taliban. They have trained them. They have given education, whatever. Now, US's relation with Afghanistan, and also I'll talk about India, that Taliban has offered a overture to India that they would like to maintain a friendly relation. And right after that, there was this meeting that took place in Doha. The Taliban leader somehow assured that they would, they would assure safety and security of the Indians. So, talking about the whole geopolitical strategy, also Russia and China is there on the other side. Your
Yeah.
take on that? Yeah.
So, there's been a total inversion or a total turn in the kind of regional and geopolitical, balance focusing on Afghanistan and Central Asia. Whereas in the past, you had a kind of democratic Afghanistan supported by the US, by Europe, by the West in general, and by the democratic world in Asia and other places, including India. They were aligned. It was not like they were in alliance. Some of them, the NATO and coalition countries were allied, but the others were broadly, in support or aligned with that. As a result of this Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, now the equations have changed completely. Now you have a kind of obscurantist, fundamentalist Taliban, which is saying that it has changed, but it has to be seen. Supported strongly, clearly by Pakistan, reinforced by China's economic power and strategic heft. And you have also Iran and Russia, for this, up to now at least, more or less aligned with the takeover of the military takeover of Afghanistan. At least they kind of accepted it, as have actually, frankly, most of the West. But they are much more supportive of it. So the regional and geopolitical balance has completely changed, and so I think that is one factor. But but I think its implications are threefold. One is that it will definitely give a big fillip to the extremist, radical, and terrorist elements that inhabit what we call the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, but whose interests range from Central Asia to South Asia, to perhaps even portions of West Asia, Iran, the Baluchistan area of Iran, Sistan, Baluchistan, and so on. The second is that this is going to be a big blow to US reputation and power. The third, it is going to give China strategic space in Afghanistan that had so far been occupied by the United States and the West. If you just combine these three, essentially you are back at a kind of situation like 1989 when the Soviet troops left, which is the Soviet troops left were followed by a collapse of the Soviet Union. Here, of course, nobody expects a collapse of the United States. It still remains the world's most powerful country, but its credibility will take a beating, and it will be a pretty broken United States, which will have to re-establish its credibility in many other parts of the world, while China will promote the narrative of US failure and US decline.
Right. And in the meantime, we have seen that, India has somehow maintained a silent approach, although it has been holding talks with different leaders. But that somehow has been viewed by US in a different way. Do you think that the relation between US and India would somehow also be, at stake, or do you see the whole? How do you see the whole scenario in that case?
It's a good question. I'm not sure of the answer. Clearly, I think what the United States has done in Afghanistan is at cross purposes from what we would have expected and what was the case for the last 20 years, and which provided an umbrella for us to return to Afghanistan, resume our development projects and scholarships, and earn the goodwill of Afghan people. But US and India have larger stakes. We have a common interest in the Indo-Pacific. We have a much larger trade and technological relationship. I think we'll have to see how the government adjusts to what I would call, in one sense, a kind of betrayal in Central Asia, in balancing it with the larger interests that it has elsewhere in the world. So I would, I would think that the government will try to manage this relationship and not really let it affect the overall relationship. But I would also think that it will definitely be an issue in India-US relations, which will keep coming up. But now the deal is done. You see, now it has happened. The US troops have left. Basically, the region is left with the mess. And I don't see how the region, how the United States is going to contribute to the improvement of the mess, because they have made it very clear they have left. They say that they will be diplomatically engaged, but what leverage do they have anymore? Effectively, the leverage lies with Pakistan, maybe China, maybe Russia, maybe Iran. So I don't even really know what it can do. And by and large, what we also see is that the international community is somehow resigning and reconciling itself to what is effectively everyone calls a reality, or a de facto. But I think that's a very severe betrayal of the Afghan people. It is treating them collateral to other countries' other interests, and I don't think that's a positive development.
Right. Of course, my last question, I would talk, of course, now that we have been talking about, we have seen India has been home to many refugees, not only Afghanistan, but people from Myanmar and other Rohingya refugees, and many Tibetan also, Sri Lankan as well. Now that many are somehow, has landed up in India and different countries, of course, and India has somehow accepted it, right? Now, if we talk about the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, that has come to the limelight somehow. Going further, if we talk about India's refugee policy, how do you view this? What should be the way forward in this matter? Because this is also somehow it's a major concern.
India has historically been a country that has been hospitable to refugees, regardless of faith or ethnicity or anything. We have had refugees from almost time immemorial. The Jews who landed up here under persecution, the Syrio-Malabar, the Syrian Christians who landed up here, the Tamil refugees, the Tibetan refugees, Bangladeshi refugees during the India-Bangladesh, the India-Pakistan War of 1971. And I think it has been one of the greatnesses of India that despite being a poor country, it has been able to accept refugees from the immediate region. And it also includes historically Armenians. So many other communities have come here. Of course, this is a matter, it's a public matter. I do not believe that India should have a refugee policy that is based on religion. Refugee policy, if we have to go to that, has to be based on, on basically persecution of people in their countries. And it should be a refugee policy that provides asylum. And we can distinguish between economic migrants and a kind of, asylum policy for people who are persecuted all over the world. Afghans today are definitely in desperate straits. So CAA or no, I think India should, welcome those Afghans who are in danger and who are close to India and who wish to leave. And I would make one very important distinction for your, audiences, that people who are coming on visas or emergency visas or for temporary stay or even for asylum are not ipso facto automatically refugees who are going to live here permanently. In fact, all these refugees, their first priority would be to go back to their countries where they have grown, where they have their land, where they have their occupations. And so we should see this as a temporary step to enable them to go back. And in fact, along with them, they bring many assets. They bring their talent. They bring you a political constituency in that country. Remember, in a way, Pakistan's hold on Afghanistan is because it accepted 3 million refugees in Pakistan, which maybe now it would like to send back. So, even I don't call them refugees. As I say, I call them temporary residents fleeing persecution. And many of them would actually look for, pastures in third countries. And why should we object to that? They come here, they spend a few months, they process their refugee papers with the UNHRC or with other embassies in New Delhi, and they leave. Or they wait till situation turns better. And we should, of course, contribute to making the situation better and going back. So clearly, if I have to put it in one sentence, I would say a refugee policy should be oriented towards those who are persecuted in our immediate neighborhood, and not through the prism of religion.
Right. Talking about, you have just mentioned about that. Of course, now Pakistan is at somehow is in the whole scenario seems to be like, Pakistan has higher leverage than other countries. So if we talk about the Kashmir factor, now that Taliban has taken over and also Pakistan has somehow stepped in, your take on this? Because there are a lot of assumptions and experts viewing that it might be a threat for Kashmir or for India's internal security.
I think as far as Kashmir is concerned, India has now a fairly strong counterinsurgency, counterterrorism grid. And, I think it has been managing it for the last few years, and most probably it will continue to manage it. I don't think the threat actually comes from Afghans or perhaps even the Taliban, but it does come from Pak-based anti-Indian groups or, groups that are focused on Kashmir. I think the bigger problem is that the return of the Taliban as victors after 20 years is going to embolden and give a fillip to all kinds of radical, extremist, fundamentalist groups in the world between Africa and Southeast Asia. And I think that is not something that is going to be confined to Kashmir only. That could rear its head in any part of the world, including perhaps, disaffected and disgruntled sections in India. So I would say that, yes, it is not just a threat to India. It's a much larger global threat. And the organizations are not confined to one country or another country, let's say the IMU for Uzbekistan, or, the Jaish-e-Mohammed or Lashkar-e-Taiba between India and Pakistan. But even international terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS itself. And one of the things that we may see is the rearing of the head of ISIS. They moved initially, some of them from Iraq and Syria to Afghanistan. And now this will be a theater for them to, renew and in fact, perhaps upgrade their capabilities. And that's what possibly we saw in the Kabul, airport attacks.
Of course. All right, sir. That's all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you, and my greetings to your audiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much.